I'm Johan Norberg, and I've been studying economic freedom for decades. What is it? And what impact does it have on people's lives? I'm here in Montreal, Canada, outside the offices of the Fraser Institute, whose work on economic freedom has become the gold standard, used by economists, researchers, and policymakers around the world. The Institute has developed an objective way of measuring the economic freedom of a country, and they've created a report that I've often used myself in my writings and lectures. But the Economic Freedom of the World report is not just about numbers and charts and graphs. No, it's really about people. People who want the opportunity to work hard, to become self-sufficient and independent, and to improve their quality of life. I'm here today to meet with the authors of the Economic Freedom of the World report and to find out about their process of measuring countries. Great to see you.
Great to see you.
Thank you for being here. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. What is this report and how does it work?
Well, it's really an effort to view the world through the lens of opportunity and control over one's life. Essentially, institutions and policies influence the opportunities that individuals have in terms of choosing their own occupations, choosing entrepreneurial activities, engaging in trade with people, and perhaps most importantly, the opportunity to keep what they earn. And we thought it would be interesting to see how those changes affect the economic freedom of people.
So the idea was to try to quantify this. So we had to collect data on a lot of countries, data from the World Bank, the IMF, other reputable sources. And then we put it all into the computer. We worked on it for many, many years. Jim had some health problems and lost his eyesight. So that set us back a little bit, but we persevered. And after almost 7 or 8 years, we finally came out with a good report.
So you're basically looking at the kind of things that would give people power over their incomes, their wealth, their jobs, the freedom to start a business, to trade.
Precisely.
That's right. We take the data that is encapsulated in this idea of economic freedom, and we rank 144 countries around the world on a 0 to 10 scale, with 10 being the most economically free.
Why 144 countries? Why not every single country on the world?
Well, we're a data-driven exercise, and for some countries, there's not data available, either because it's too small or it's an autocratic regime. Cuba, for example, the data we have either doesn't exist or can't really be trusted. And so, 144 countries are the ones we think we can rank very well, and it covers about 97% of the world's population.
So the index has been put to use in many, many, many different ways. Certainly people have looked at income and growth, but very importantly is people looking at human rights violations, incidents of civil war and violence. Really interesting to see the number of ways the index was used.
Guys, you've been using this report to rank countries for the past 17 years. What have you learned from the analysis of the data?
There's been a lot of work done on economic freedom and unemployment. And countries that are less free have higher rates of unemployment. In terms of starting out in your life, the ability to go out and be able to build up skills in the workplace is very personally liberating. And it must be very difficult to be in a country, let's say like Spain, where you have youth unemployment of over 50%. That's got to be, it makes one's outlook for the future very, very bleak.
One of the most important things we've learned is that countries that are economically more free grow more rapidly and achieve higher income levels. And in fact, not just a little bit higher income levels, but a lot higher income levels. For example, the per person income of the highest quartile, the highest 1/4 of economically free countries, is 7 times what the figure is for the lowest group. So that's a huge difference.
But it's not just about rising incomes overall, it's also about the poorest of the poor. If we look at that bottom quartile, the poorest 10% of those societies have average incomes of about $1,200 per capita. If we look at the upper quartile, the most free quartile, they have average incomes of over $11,000. Now, that's not a lot to live on, but it's a whole lot more than $1,200.
So as people work their way out of poverty, that's a substantial improvement in their quality of life.
It's not just about the quality of life, it's about the quantity of life. If we look at the most free countries and compare them to the least free countries, the most free countries have substantially higher life expectancies, 18 years.
A lot of that relationship is probably driven by the fact that more free countries have higher incomes, better sanitation, nutrition, things like that. If you live to be 80 versus 60, that's the difference between getting to know your grandkids, see your grandkids grow up, see your great-grandchildren. Economic freedom is sure, it's about income, it's about growth, but it's also about quality of life and knowing your grandkids or not. And if you have more economic freedom, you have a better chance of knowing your grandkids. And that's more important, or as important, as how many cars are in the driveway and things like that.
For over 30 years, the United States was around third place. But in this latest report, the US is at 19. Why? What happened?
Well, the freest economies in the world are Hong Kong and Singapore, and they have been the freest for more than 3 decades now. Other countries that rank relatively high are Switzerland, New Zealand, Canada, Australia. I think actually that's the 6th highest countries. The United States was, for an extended period of time, all during the 1980s and 1990s, was ranked 3rd behind only Hong Kong and Singapore, but the United States has actually dropped down in recent years, since 2000. So the U.S. is not as free as what it was a few years ago.
Well, generally, the Economic Freedom Index is showing a rise of economic freedom around the world, and only a handful of countries are decreasing.
The biggest single factor contributing to the U.S. decline is the decline in the legal structure area and protection of property rights. From the wars on drugs and terror to the more widespread use of eminent domain to take property from one party and transfer it to another, to the auto bailout, which tended to undermine the property rights of bondholders.
Some people object to economic freedom because they think it's just freedom for the well-off, for the big businesses and for those who already have power. What's your take on that?
I think if you look at the U.S. In response to kind of the financial crisis, what did we get? We got greater concentration in the banking industry. It's harder to be a local bank, local savings and loan. The banking interests and banking lobbyists used the opportunity by the financial crisis to solidify their position in the marketplace. That's not economic freedom. Right, that's antithetical to economic freedom.
All those lobbyists that those corporations hire and they send to the national capital, they're not arguing for more economic freedom, they're arguing for less. They're arguing for special privileges.
The political process favors well-organized interest groups, and typically that's going to be the well-off among the business groups as well-organized labor groups.
Whereas there's really no interest groups for those who aren't there in the market yet, for the future stores and businesses and things like that.
Future entrepreneur, the taxpayer, and the consumer are not well organized, and therefore the political process seldom represents them.
Yeah, too often politicians are only offering short-term fixes. They promise instant gratification. And the problem is that at the end, it comes at the expense of economic freedom and competition in the marketplace.
Oppression of economic freedom, it's kind of subtle, and it goes under the radar, and fewer people notice it, and that's what makes it very difficult to defend.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about this Economic Freedom of the World report. It makes these trends visible. It tells us where to look, it gets us talking about it, and that's why we do this.
That's why you do this. That's why I write about it. That's why we talk about it. Guys, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your work on this.
Thank you. Thank you.